In 2025, California's fast food workers started earning $20 an hour, a 25% jump from the old $16 minimum. Critics warned this move would trigger massive layoffs, soaring prices, and a collapse of the industry. But after a full year, the actual numbers tell a different story. According to UC Berkeley researchers, net job losses were only about 1,300, far below the Doomsday forecasts. Menu prices went up just 2.1% on average, not the double-digit spikes people feared. And after adjusting for seasonal trends, the total number of fast food restaurants in California actually grew by 2%. So with all the drama leading up to the law, what did people actually predict when the $20 wage was announced? The Doomsday predictions. The rollout of California's $20 minimum wage for fast food workers triggered a flood of grim forecasts from industry groups and politicians. Business associations published reports warning that the new law would wipe out tens of thousands of jobs, drive menu prices up to absurd levels, and force a wave of restaurant closures. The Employment Policies Institute, for example, claimed that as many as 16,000 jobs would disappear, and some headlines warned of $18 Big Macs. Full-page ads in major newspapers predicted a fast food exodus and the collapse of the industry as we know it. But behind those dramatic headlines were some questionable assumptions. Many of the scariest numbers came from comparing summer to fall employment, a period when fast food jobs always drop due to seasonal patterns. When you look at year-over-year data, the reality is much less dramatic. The state saw a 1.3% decline in fast food jobs, which matches the national trend for the same period. According to the California Bureau of Labor Statistics, the net job loss was about 1,300 positions in the first year, not the 10,000 or more that were widely predicted. Predictions about menu prices were just as inflated. Opponents of the wage hike suggested that customers would see prices jump by 14% or more, with some warning of 25% increases across the board. However, data from UC Berkeley shows the average modeled price increase was only about 1.5%, roughly 38 cents on an $18 meal. In fact, fast food price inflation actually lagged behind overall food away from home inflation in California that year. While some chains made modest price adjustments, others found ways to absorb the higher labor costs without passing them directly to customers. Some chains managed to expand even as the wage floor rose. In-N-Out Burger, for example, added 800 jobs across California locations while paying the new $20 minimum, and it did so without significant price hikes. Meanwhile, the limited job losses that did occur were concentrated among franchises and independent operators with fewer resources to adapt, rather than large corporate chains with access to better technology and operational systems. Automation was another frequent talking point in the debate. Industry critics insisted that a higher minimum wage would force restaurants to rapidly replace workers with kiosks and robots. Yet in practice, industry reports show that automation in California fast food rose just 3%, no faster than the national average. Most locations continued to rely on human staff for food prep and customer service, since existing technology couldn't fully replace the flexibility and problem-solving that people provide. Consumer behavior didn't match the warnings either. Despite concerns about higher prices, customer traffic at fast food restaurants in California dropped by only 1.2% over the year. The feared mass boycott never materialized. In some cases, better-paid workers delivered improved service, which helped retain regular customers and even boosted sales for certain chains. The gap between dire predictions and actual outcomes highlights how politicized the minimum wage debate had become. Both supporters and critics leaned heavily on worst-case scenarios, ignoring the possibility that businesses would adapt in less dramatic ways. Real-world data showed that companies responded with a mix of strategies, adjusting schedules, reducing food waste, and improving shift efficiency, rather than simply cutting jobs or raising prices. This pattern of exaggerated warnings isn't new. Similar doomsday predictions have accompanied previous minimum wage hikes, but the 85% gap between predicted and actual job losses in California stands out. The real test, though, was how individual chains responded on the ground. Some adapted quickly, while others struggled to keep up. The Restaurant Survival Guide. California's fast food industry in 2025 offered a clear look at which strategies worked best for restaurants facing higher labor costs. The most successful chains didn't just raise prices, they rethought how their businesses operated from the ground up. Labor scheduling was one of the first areas to see change. Chains like Chipotle used AI-powered software to match staff levels to real-time customer demand, reducing overlapping shifts by 15%. Wendy's tried split shifts to better align employee hours with busy periods, which cut excess labor by 12% without hurting service. These targeted adjustments improved efficiency and helped absorb the wage increase without major job cuts or price spikes. Food waste was another area where technology made a difference. McDonald's locations in California installed smart inventory systems that tracked ingredient use and automatically adjusted prep quantities. This cut spoilage by 18%. Burger King franchises that adopted similar systems saved around $7,500 per month at each location, directly offsetting some of the increased payroll costs. Retaining employees became a top priority. Chains that invested in staff retention saw turnover drop by 22% compared to before the wage hike. In-N-Out Burger, for example, increased training budgets and offered bonuses to long-term employees, which pushed their average crew tenure from 14 to 18 months. This stability led to better service and lower hiring costs. Automation played a role, but not in the way many expected. Some chains, like White Castle, brought in robots for repetitive tasks such as frying, but these machines worked alongside human staff rather than replacing them. The main effect was to free up employees for customer-facing roles and improve overall service. Only about 3% of fast food locations in California automated a significant portion of their operations, and most chose a blended approach that emphasized both technology and human interaction. Training programs changed as well. Several chains introduced certification tracks that helped workers become more productive. Chipotle, for instance, saw a 14% increase in the number of orders completed per hour after launching a new training curriculum. These productivity gains helped keep labor costs manageable, even with higher wages. Menu changes also helped. Many restaurants added higher-margin specialty items to boost profits. BurgerBot, for example, used robots to handle burger assembly, but kept a full human staff for hospitality. This allowed them to charge premium prices for automated menu items while keeping the customer experience personal and engaging. Corporate-owned chains generally adapted more easily than independent franchises. Larger companies could invest in new technology and training more quickly, thanks to centralized resources and purchasing power. Independents, by contrast, often struggled to afford the upgrades that made the biggest difference. Customer habits reflected these changes. Locations that improved service and retained staff saw customer satisfaction scores climb by 17% on average, which often translated into higher average order values. People were willing to pay a little more if the experience was noticeably better. Local flexibility turned out to be important. Chains that let regional managers tailor solutions to their markets performed better than those with rigid, one-size-fits-all mandates. Stores in high-cost urban areas often needed different approaches than those in rural regions, and the most successful chains recognized this early. Relationships with suppliers also became more important. Chains that worked closely with distributors managed to negotiate better prices and streamline inventory, which helped cushion the impact of higher wages. Marketing shifted to highlight these improvements. Many chains promoted their better-trained staff and upgraded ingredients, helping to justify modest price increases and set themselves apart from competitors who focused only on cost-cutting. What emerged was a picture of adaptation through many small, coordinated changes. The chains that thrived combined smarter scheduling, waste reduction, staff investment, and careful menu engineering. They didn't rely on any single fix, but instead used a mix of strategies to stay profitable. This approach set the stage for the next big question: what role did automation actually play in all of this? The automation myth buster. Predictions of a rapid takeover by robots in California's fast food kitchens surfaced as soon as the $20 minimum wage was announced. Commentators expected a wave of automation, with machines replacing workers across the state. But when the numbers came in, the picture was far less dramatic. Automation in fast food rose by only 3% in California during 2025, which was in line with the national average, hardly a dramatic shift driven by the wage increase. Despite the attention on robotics, human workers remained central to nearly every aspect of fast food operations. Even where chains installed new machines, these tools were limited in scope. White Castle, for instance, brought in burger-flipping robots, but they only handled basic, repetitive tasks. Staff were still needed to assemble orders, handle special requests, and interact with customers. The machines were reliable for standardized items, but anything requiring judgment or flexibility still depended on people. Ordering kiosks became more common, a appearing in over a quarter of California's fast food locations by the end of the year. However, these kiosks didn't actually cut jobs. Instead, they shifted responsibilities. Employees who would have been at the register moved to food prep or customer service. Some chains reported higher customer satisfaction after making these changes, since staff had more time to help with special requests or keep dining areas clean. The kiosks improved accuracy for standard orders, but staff were still needed for anything out of the ordinary. Efforts to automate drive-thrus ran into technical limitations. AI voice systems could process most orders, but accuracy hovered around 76% without human intervention. Background noise, accents, and complex orders often tripped up the software. As a result, employees still monitored the systems and stepped in as needed. This led to new hybrid jobs rather than widespread job cuts. The cost of automation also slowed adoption. A single automated fry station cost as much as 1,750 hours of work at the new minimum wage. For many franchise owners, the math didn't add up, especially when factoring in maintenance costs and the need for specialized technicians. Some robots required repairs from workers earning more per hour than the staff they were supposed to replace. Delays in the supply chain, especially for parts sourced from overseas, created additional headaches and forced some locations to rely on human labor while waiting for repairs. Customer preferences played a role as well. Focus groups consistently preferred interacting with people for service issues or custom orders. When some chains tried fully automated locations, customers reported a colder, less welcoming experience, and sales dropped compared to traditional stores. Even with the introduction of smart pickup lockers for online orders, staff were still needed to restock and maintain the systems. Labor agreements also influenced the pace of automation. Some chains negotiated with unions to guarantee staffing minimums or retraining for workers displaced by machines. In a few cases, employees received extra pay for learning to operate or maintain new equipment, turning automation into a source of new job opportunities rather than just job losses. For smaller chains and independent operators, the hurdles were even higher. Lacking the resources of big corporations, many relied on simpler solutions like pre-prepared ingredients from central kitchens rather than expensive robotics. This helped control costs but kept labor needs steady at local restaurants. The complexity of fast food menus was another constraint. Chains with standardized, simple offerings found it easier to automate tasks, while those with highly customizable menus, like Chipotle, couldn't find machines flexible enough to handle all the variations customers wanted. Even the most advanced burger-flipping robots struggled with inconsistent patties or unexpected requests, requiring constant oversight from human staff. Automation did bring some improvements, particularly in behind-the-scenes roles. Dishwashing robots reduced exposure to chemicals, and automated inventory systems cut down on tedious manual checks. Central commissary kitchens supplying multiple locations increased their use of automation, but this didn't eliminate the need for staff at individual restaurants. Overall, the shift toward automation in California's fast food sector was gradual and selective, shaped by technical, financial, and human factors. Machines took on some repetitive tasks, but people remained essential for quality, service, and adaptability. The reality of automation was far less disruptive than the headlines suggested. With so much focus on robots, it's easy to overlook another area that drew concern: how much prices would actually rise for customers. The price hike reality check. Price increases were a major concern when California's $20 fast food minimum wage became law. Industry groups and critics warned of dramatic menu hikes that would make fast food unaffordable for many. In practice, the numbers told a more nuanced story. According to Revenue Management Solutions, the average fast food menu price in California rose 7.5% year-over-year by mid-2024, compared to a national average of 3.1%. This was a noticeable jump, but it fell short of the double-digit surges some had predicted. A typical meal went from $8.12 to $8.50, and a standard $4 hamburger increased by about 15 cents, not the dollar-plus hikes that were widely publicized. Data from the UC Berkeley Institute for Research and Labor Employment found that the average price hike for popular menu items was 3.7%. Full-service restaurants in California actually raised prices faster, at 4.2%, and grocery store inflation reached 5.1%. This put fast food price increases in a broader context and suggested that the minimum wage law was not the sole driver of higher costs. Many chains managed their labor expenses through operational changes, such as improved inventory tracking and waste reduction, instead of passing all costs to consumers. Customer behavior shifted in response to these changes. Transaction counts at California fast food outlets dropped 5.9% year-over-year, a steeper decline than the national average, but still within a range that suggested adaptation rather than abandonment. Instead of walking away from fast food altogether, customers adjusted by ordering fewer items per visit. Some chains even saw average revenue per customer rise, as people chose more expensive menu options or specialty items, offsetting the smaller basket sizes. The Berkeley Research Group reported that menu prices increased by 14.5% since the wage legislation was signed, but this figure included changes unrelated to the wage hike, such as pre-existing inflation and new menu introductions. When isolating the effect of the wage increase, core price jumps averaged under 4%. Internal documents from several chains revealed that some price adjustments were planned before the wage law, and that the new minimum wage simply provided an opportunity to implement them alongside other changes. Geography and business structure played a role in price differences. Urban coastal areas like Los Angeles County averaged smaller price hikes, around 2.9%, while rural regions saw increases closer to 4.1%. Corporate-owned locations typically kept price hikes to about 3.2%, while franchisees, who often faced tighter margins, averaged 4.8%. This variation reflected differences in competition and customer price sensitivity across regions. Menu engineering was another key factor. Chains introduced new, higher-margin items to help offset labor costs, keeping price increases for core items modest. For example, specialty burgers or combo meals saw larger increases, while basic menu staples remained relatively stable. High-profit items like fries and beverages barely changed in price. Starbucks raised prices on complex drinks but left basic coffee nearly unchanged, a strategy echoed by other brands. Timing also mattered. Most price increases happened within the first 3 months after the wage law took effect, with a plateau afterward. Some chains waited for competitors to move first, resulting in smaller hikes for late adopters. Wendy's, for instance, held prices steady for half a year before making smaller adjustments than those who raised prices immediately. Other factors influenced the final impact. Rising costs for dairy and produce, unrelated to the wage law, also contributed to menu price changes. Some chains were transparent about this, breaking down receipts to show how much of an increase came from higher wages versus other inputs. Quality upgrades further shaped consumer perceptions. Chains that improved ingredients or service alongside price hikes found that customers were more accepting of the new prices. Comparisons across state lines showed the limits of wage-driven price inflation. A cheeseburger at Five Guys cost just 30 cents more in Sacramento than in Phoenix, despite a much higher minimum wage in California. This pointed to a range of factors, beyond labor costs, driving national fast food inflation. The evidence showed that while fast food did get more expensive in California, the increases were measured and often accompanied by operational improvements or quality upgrades. Chains that managed the transition carefully retained customer loyalty and avoided sharp declines in traffic. Those that relied solely on raising prices saw steeper drops in visits. The story of price hikes was less about runaway inflation and more about how businesses adapted to new realities. Not all segments of the market experienced the changes in the same way, and some unexpected effects began to surface among the smaller players in the industry. The secret winners. Among the most surprising developments after California's $20 fast food minimum wage took effect were the advantages that fell to chains operating just outside the law's reach. The legislation applied only to businesses with 60 or more locations nationwide, creating a clear dividing line. Smaller regional chains and independent operators suddenly found themselves in a unique position, navigating a labor market that had shifted overnight. In this new environment, some small and mid-sized chains carved out a niche by offering wages just below the $20 mark, often in the $18 to $19.50 range, while emphasizing perks like flexible scheduling or a more relaxed workplace culture. For example, Baker's Drive-Thru, with 27 locations, raised pay to $19.50 and promoted its family-owned atmosphere. Their turnover rate dropped noticeably, as workers weighed a slightly lower paycheck against a more manageable work environment. In contrast, other small operators struggled to keep staff as employees left for higher-paying jobs at large chains, forcing some to close stores or cut hours. The wage law unintentionally created a two-tier system. Employees at exempt chains often accepted slightly lower wages in exchange for better schedules, shorter commutes, or a friendlier atmosphere. Research from the UC Riverside Labor Institute found that workers would take a pay cut of $1 or $2 per hour for improved working conditions, but businesses offering less than $18 an hour couldn't compete at all. The $16-17 range quickly disappeared from the market as job seekers simply bypassed those listings. Some small chains benefited from the new hiring landscape. With major brands becoming more selective, regional operators like Angel's Tacos saw a surge in applicants. While their base wage remained at $17, they attracted workers who didn't meet the stricter criteria at McDonald's or Wendy's. These businesses became the entry point for people looking to break into fast food, even as they struggled with higher turnover and less experienced staff. The service gap between the two tiers became obvious to customers. Yelp reviews for exempt restaurants dropped in service and speed, while large chains saw modest improvements. Covered chains could afford to invest more in training and retention, which translated to shorter wait times and better customer experiences. At the same time, smaller chains experimented with new models. Some switched to counter service only, reducing staff needs and keeping wages competitive, while others introduced tip sharing or unique benefits like paid time off or gym memberships to attract and keep employees. The exemption threshold itself shaped business decisions. Several chains halted expansion at 59 locations to avoid triggering the wage mandate, while others split corporate structures or rebranded locations under separate ownership to remain exempt.